In the sweltering shadows of 1854 Texas, where the cotton fields whisper secrets of sin and suffering, a sheriff uncovers children, enslaved, innocent, who vanish like ghosts in the night, only to return years later, their tongues twisted by a flawless French that echoes divine judgment. What unholy education haunts their missing years? And what retribution awaits those who played God with stolen souls? The sun hung low over the Galveston County Courthouse, casting long, jagged shadows across the weathered wooden planks of its porch. Dust motes danced in the golden haze filtering through cracked window panes, carrying the faint scent of salt from the nearby Gulf and the acrid tang of horse sweat from the hitching posts outside. Inside, the air was thick, stagnant, laced with the musty odor of old ledgers and unwashed desperation. Sheriff Elias Hawthorne, tall, broad-shouldered, with a face etched by years of frontier justice, leaned forward in his creaking oak chair, his calloused hands clasped tightly on the scarred desk. Across from him sat a girl, no older than 9, her small frame swallowed by a threadbare cotton dress stained with the red clay of Texas soil. Her eyes, wide and dark as midnight wells, held a depth that unnerved him, as if they had witnessed realms beyond the brutal simplicity of plantation life. Hawthorne cleared his throat, the sound rough like gravel under boots. "What's your name, child?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with the drawl of a man born to these lands. She lifted her chin, her lips parting softly. "Je m'appelle Marie," she replied, her words flowing like silk over polished marble, flawless French, accented with the elegance of a Versailles courtier. No hesitation, no trace of the guttural English that should have been her birthright. It was as if the language had been etched into her soul by some invisible hand, a mark of something profound and forbidden. The plantation owner who had dragged her here, Josiah Blackwood, paced the room like a caged wolf, his boots thudding against the floorboards. His face was a mask of fury and bewilderment, sweat beading on his brow despite the evening chill seeping through the walls. "See? Not a damn word of English," he growled, his voice tight as a noose. "Bought her fair and square at the Houston auction 3 weeks back. Auctioneer vowed she was Texas-born, raised on some backwoods spread in the East. No ties to them Frenchies in Louisiana, no fancy bloodline. But she chatters like one of them high-born Parisians. It's unnatural, Sheriff." Like the devil himself whispered in her ear. Hawthorne's deputy, Silas Reed, leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed over his chest, the badge on his vest glinting faintly in the lamplight. Reed was younger, sharper-eyed, with a mind that cut through fog like a blade. "That's the 8th one, ain't it?" he murmured, his tone low, almost reverent, as if speaking too loudly might summon whatever shadow loomed over these cases. 8, Hawthorne confirmed, his voice a rumble. 8 children in 2 years, scattered across the vast, unforgiving expanse of Texas, from the humid bayous near the Sabine River to the dusty plains of the Brazos Valley. All enslaved, all between 6 and 12 years old, all speaking a French so pure it could shame a scholar. And beneath that linguistic miracle lay a darker pattern. Each had been torn from their origins before the age of 4, vanishing into the ether like smoke from a campfire, only to resurface at auctions or private sales, their memories fractured, their spirits marked by an education that reeked of forbidden knowledge. What Hawthorne kept locked in his mind, like a confession in a confessor's booth, was the spiritual weight of it all. These weren't mere anomalies in the machinery of slavery, they felt like omens, biblical echoes of children led astray, of innocence corrupted in the name of some twisted redemption. Was this divine retribution for the sins of a nation built on chains? Or the work of mortal hands playing at godhood, inviting judgment from above? The sheriff felt a chill sneak down his spine, as if the very air carried the whisper of Psalms, "Vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord." These children, with their foreign tongues, seemed vessels for a higher justice, their words a haunting indictment of the land's moral decay. The mystery had clawed its way into Hawthorne's life 2 years prior, in the blooming spring of 1852, when the first whispers reached his ears. It began not with thunder, but with a quiet disturbance on a cotton plantation in Fort Bend County. Elijah Harlan, a stern planter with hands gnarled from years of wielding the whip, had ridden into town under a sky heavy with rain clouds, his wagon kicking up mud that splattered like blood on the road. He'd just acquired an 8-year-old boy named Samuel at the bustling Houston slave market, where the air reeked of tobacco smoke, sweat-soaked bodies, and the metallic tang of desperation. The trader, a slick-tongued man named Elias Hawthorne, had sworn on a stack of Bibles that the boy was homegrown, born to field hands in Cherokee County, docile as a lamb, already broken to the plow despite his tender years. Harlan had haggled the price down, chalking the bargain to the child's slight build, his frame more willow than oak. But back on the plantation, as the sun dipped behind the endless rows of cotton bolls swaying like ghosts in the wind, chaos erupted. The boy stood amid the fields, the earth cool and damp under his bare feet, the overseer's commands barking like distant thunder. "Pick up that hoe, boy. Get to work." The words fell on deaf ears, or rather, uncomprehending ones. Samuel's response came in a torrent of French, fluid and sophisticated, his voice rising in panic. "Je ne comprends pas. Oh suis-je? Aidez-moi." The other workers froze, tools dropping from calloused hands, their faces a mosaic of shock and superstition. Whispers rippled through the quarters that night, under the flickering light of tallow candles. "That boy's possessed. Speaks in tongues like the apostles, but it ain't holy." Harlan, a man who feared God as much as he feared crop failure, dragged the boy to the main house. The parlor smelled of polished wood and pipe tobacco, the walls adorned with faded portraits of ancestors whose eyes seemed to judge from the shadows. Harlan's wife, Abigail, a pious woman with a Bible always at hand, tried to soothe the child, offering cornbread warm from the hearth. But Samuel's eyes darted like trapped animals, his French pouring forth in pleas that Harlan could only half grasp from his wartime brushes with Creole scouts. This wasn't the pidgin patois of the bayous, it was the refined cadence of salons and academies, laced with vocabulary that spoke of literature, philosophy, words no enslaved child should know. Desperate, Harlan rode through the night to Hawthorne's office, the moon casting silvery light on the winding trails lined with live oaks draped in Spanish moss. "This ain't right, Sheriff," Harlan said, his voice trembling as he paced the room, the floor creaking under his weight. "Boy talks like he's been schooled by kings. But papers say he's Texas dirt through and through. No French in his blood, no time in Louisiana. It's like someone's rewritten his soul." Hawthorne, intrigued despite himself, delved into the records. The bill of sale was crisp, ink still dark, notarized by a Houston clerk whose seal gleamed like a promise. Thorne, the trader, was a fixture in East Texas circles, reputable, if ruthless. When Hawthorne cornered him in a smoky tavern, the air thick with whiskey and cigar haze, Thorne shrugged, his eyes evasive under the brim of his hat. "Bought him from a widow's estate in Nacogdoches. Quiet kid, followed English orders fine enough. Never heard a peep of French from him." The widow's ledgers confirmed a purchase at age 4 from a shadowy broker, but the trail frayed like old rope, contradictory birthplaces, vanished parents, gaps in the chain of custody. In the end, Harlan kept Samuel, hiring a French tutor from Galveston, a wiry merchant with an accent thick as molasses, to bridge the linguistic chasm. Months passed, the boy's English emerging haltingly, like a river breaking through ice. But when questioned about his past, Samuel's face clouded, his small hands twisting in his lap. "It was a dream," he'd whisper, eyes distant, as if peering into a void. No memories of the fields, no recollection of family, just fragments of lessons in a place of echoing rooms, where voices drilled words into his mind like seeds into fertile soil. Hawthorne dismissed it then as a quirk of fate, perhaps a child shuffled through hidden French enclaves in the borderlands. But fate, or Providence, had other plans. 6 months later, in the crisp autumn of 1852, when leaves turned the color of rust and the air carried the sharp bite of impending winter, another case shattered the illusion of isolation. In Austin, where the Colorado River wound like a serpent through hills dotted with cedar and scrub oak, widow Eliza Thornton ran a boarding house that smelled perpetually of baking bread and lye soap. She was a woman of quiet faith, her days structured by scripture and service, her nights haunted by the loss of her husband to fever years before. Seeking help for the endless chores, scrubbing floors until they gleamed, tending the hearth where flames danced like restless spirits, she purchased a 10-year-old girl named Lydia through a local broker known for matching domestics with genteel homes. The broker, a portly man with a ledger thick as a Bible, presented papers impeccable, Texas-born in Washington County, lineage traced to sturdy farm stock, no frills, no flaws. Lydia arrived at dawn, the sky streaked with pink and gold, her footsteps soft on the dew-kissed path. By midday, as Eliza set her to peeling potatoes in the kitchen, steam rising from the pot like prayers ascending, the girl froze at a simple command. "Fetch the salt, child." Lydia's response was a cascade of French. "Je ne sais pas où le sel s'il vous plaît, madame, où suis-je?" Her voice was melodic, precise, evoking images of candlelit chateaux and whispered court. Intrigues. Eliza, who had studied French in her youth at a Virginia academy, recognized the purity immediately better than her tutors, laced with idioms of high society. Panic seized Eliza like a vice. She marched to the magistrate's office, her skirts swishing against the cobblestones, the town bustling with wagons and merchants under a sky-threatening rain. Judge Amos Whitaker, a scholarly figure with wire-rimmed spectacles and a library that rivaled any in the state, listened intently, his quill scratching notes on parchment that smelled of fresh ink. Unlike others who might wave it off as fraud, Whitaker sensed the undercurrent of something profound, a riddle wrapped in the moral quagmire of slavery, perhaps a sign of deeper corruption. His investigation unearthed shadows that chilled the soul. Lydia's birth records pinned her to a Washington County farm owned by the Hargrove family, simple folk, devout Baptists who toiled under God's watchful eye. They had raised her until age 3, when debt from a failed harvest forced to sale. The buyer? An enigmatic figure named Caleb Voss, who claimed ties to a Brazoria plantation. Voss paid premium, far above the worth of a toddler, and vanished like mist at dawn. His listed address? A derelict shack overgrown with vines, home only to rats and regrets. For 4 years, Lydia ceased to exist in ledgers or lore. Then, she resurfaced in a Bastrop auction, peddled by a trader with tales of an East Texas estate liquidation. No bridge spanned the void. Whitaker, troubled by the spiritual implications, children as blank slates, rewritten by unseen hands, wrote to Hawthorne, "This smacks of hubris, sheriff. Stealing innocence to mold it anew. Is this man's folly, or a mirror to our nation's sins?" The buyer sought specifically a child of that tender age, as if harvesting souls for some infernal academy. Hawthorne's reply was swift, carried by a rider through thunderstorms that lit the sky like divine wrath. He urged documentation. Vigilance. Meanwhile, he wove his own web of inquiries, letters flying to sheriffs in Houston, marshals in San Antonio, magistrates in border towns where the Sabine murmured secrets to the wind. By the thaw of 1853, the pattern crystallized like frost on glass, 5 cases, then 6, 7, each an echo of the last. In Houston, a 6-year-old boy named Jacob appeared at market, his French spilling like wine from a chalice, his origins a labyrinth of forged sails. In Galveston, a 12-year-old girl, Elise, whispered poetry in Moliere's tongue, her eyes holding the sorrow of lost Eden. East Texas yielded 2 more siblings, perhaps, though records lied, vanished at 3, returned at 8, their speech a barrier and a beacon. Hawthorne, with Reed and Whitaker's counsel, arranged interviews through rare French interpreters, merchants, exiles from Napoleon's wars who translated under lamplight in rooms heavy with incense to ward off the eerie chill. The children's tales fragmented like shattered stained glass, a house of endless halls, one murmured, describing chambers lit by flickering candles, walls lined with books bound in leather that smelled of age and authority. Daily drills in grammar, recitation of verses from Racine and Voltaire, songs that evoked distant cathedrals. Treatment was regimented, not savage meals of bread and cheese, beds clean as convent cells, but isolated, a purgatory of the mind. No maps marked the location, no faces haunted their dreams beyond vague silhouettes. It felt like floating, a boy confessed, his voice trembling. No before, no after, just the words filling me up. Why French? Why them? Blank stares met the questions, as if the purpose lay buried under layers of forgotten sin. The lessons ended abruptly, they awoke in pens, chains clinking like judgment bells, sold back into the world they scarcely remembered. Reed, pacing Hawthorne's office as rain lashed the windows, voiced the dread, someone's crafting these kids like Adam from clay. Buying 'em young, when minds are soft as wax. Educating 'em in secrets, then dumping 'em back. But for what? Spies? Servants for some elite? Or something darker, testin' the bounds of soul and sin? Whitaker, in his letters, invoked scripture, "Suffer the little children, but woe to him through whom offenses come." Hawthorne pondered alone at night, the Bible open on his desk, lamplight casting cruciform shadows. Was this a human scheme, cloaked in slavery's veil, where investigations died in the mire of property rights and silence? Or a cosmic reckoning, where stolen children returned as harbingers, their foreign words a tongue of fire, exposing the rot of a land drenched in the blood of the oppressed? As summer's heat baked the earth in 1854, Hawthorne sensed forces stirring, whispers of higher powers, perhaps federal eyes or abolitionist shadows, drawn to the anomaly. The institution that shielded the culprits also bound the investigators. To probe too deep was to question the divine order of things, inviting chaos or damnation. Yet the sheriff pressed on, driven by a gnawing empathy for these lost souls, their French a cry for redemption in a world blind to its own guilt. The eighth child, Marie, sat before him now, her presence a living enigma. As she spoke again, "O est ma mère?" Hawthorne felt the weight of unseen eyes, as if the heavens themselves watched, waiting for justice to unfold. What lay in those missing years? A school of shadows, forging identities like counterfeit coins? Or a ritual of rebirth, where innocence was sacrificed on altars of ambition? The answer, he feared, would unravel not just threads of mystery, but the fragile tapestry of a nation's conscience, haunted by the ghosts of its unforgiven sins. The autumn wind whispered through the live oaks surrounding the Galveston County Courthouse, carrying the faint, metallic scent of impending rain from the Gulf. Leaves skittered across the dirt-packed yard like restless spirits, while inside, the air hung heavy with the aroma of aged paper and lamp oil. Sheriff Elias Hawthorne spread a weathered map across his desk, its edges curled from constant handling, marked with charcoal dots that formed an ominous constellation. Each dot represented a soul, a child, snatched from the grip of slavery's iron fist, only to re-emerge years later, their tongues anointed with the elegance of French, a language alien to their blood and birthright. Deputy Silas Reed and Judge Amos Whitaker leaned in, their faces illuminated by the flickering kerosene lamp, casting elongated shadows that danced like accusations on the walls. Hawthorne's voice, gravelly from nights spent pondering the abyss, broke the silence. "I've turned over every stone in my mind," he said, his finger tracing the ink lines of rivers and counties. "Is this a ploy to forge refined servants for some Creole elite in New Orleans? But why the veil of secrecy? Why not parade the education openly, hire tutors under the sun?" He paused, the room's quiet amplifying the distant rumble of thunder, as if the heavens themselves weighed in on the debate. Reed nodded, his eyes narrowing. "Or abolitionists, smuggling knowledge like contraband? But no, these young ones aren't spirited north to freedom. They're cast back into the abyss, tongues tied in knots, worthless to the fields they once knew." Whitaker, a man whose faith ran deep as the Colorado's currents, stroked his beard thoughtfully. "It's as if they're marked for a trial, Elias. Like Job's afflictions, testing the soul's resilience under bondage. But who dares play the Almighty, reshaping innocence in their image?" The judge's words hung like incense, infusing the air with a spiritual chill, a reminder that in this land of manifest destiny, human hubris invited divine retribution. Hawthorne felt it in his bones, a gnawing sense that these children were harbingers, their foreign speech a prophetic tongue lashing against the sins of a nation built on stolen lives. As the men pondered, Hawthorne's hand swept across the map. "See here, the cradles from which they were stolen. The origins clustered in a ragged arc through central and eastern Texas, a noose tightening around a focal point 80 miles northwest of Houston, where prairies met whispering woods. And their resurrections," he continued, switching to red ink that bled like wounds on the parchment. "Auctions in Galveston, brokers in Austin, markets in distant counties, never circling back to familiar soil. It's deliberate, like scattering ashes to the wind. To erase echoes, prevent the past from rising like Lazarus." Reed's breath caught, his voice low. "Recognition. A mother's gaze, a playmate's memory, an owner's ledger, they'd unravel the thread. Whoever orchestrates this dance is on the edge of revelation, tempting fate." Whitaker murmured a verse from Proverbs, "The wicked flee when no man pursueth, but here, the pursuit is divine." These patterns scream of calculation, a mortal scheme cloaked in shadows, but God sees all. Before the trio could delve deeper into the moral labyrinth, a rap echoed at the door like knuckles on a coffin lid. A messenger, rain-slicked and breathless, thrust forward a sodden envelope. "Urgent from Waller County, Sheriff." Two more, speaking the devil's French. Hawthorne's pulse quickened, a surge of dread mingled with resolve. For the first time, multiple voices from the void, perhaps harmonizing into truth. The summons pulled them into the night, horses' hooves churning mud under a sky fractured by lightning, as if the storm mirrored the turmoil in their souls. Robert Caldwell, the plantation baron from Waller, arrived at dawn, his carriage gleaming despite the downpour, a testament to wealth wrung from sweat-soaked backs. His estate sprawled north of Houston, fields of cotton blooming white as false purity under the sun. Caldwell stormed into Hawthorne's office, his boots leaving muddy prints like accusations on the floorboards. His face, ruddy from rage and whiskey, twisted as he gestured to the two children trailing behind, a boy of 9, sturdy but solemn, and a girl of 7, her eyes downcast like wilted flowers. Defective. Useless as cracked pottery. Caldwell bellowed, his voice booming off the walls. Paid top dollar from separate traders, and neither utters a word of God's English. I demand justice, refunds, arrests, the whole infernal lot. Hawthorne waved off the bluster, his gaze locking on the children. They stood with the quiet poise of those schooled in survival, their simple garments clinging damply, exuding the faint earthiness of field labor. The boy's hands fidgeted at his sides, knuckles scarred from unseen toils, the girl's braids framed a face etched with premature wisdom. To bridge the linguistic chasm, Hawthorne summoned Émile Duval, a French merchant from Galveston whose import shop smelled of spices and sea salt. Duval, with his waxed mustache and kind eyes, had aided before, his voice a soothing bridge between worlds. Sit, children, Hawthorne said gently, though they couldn't comprehend. Duval translated, his French rolling like waves on the Seine, coaxing them onto wooden benches warmed by the morning light filtering through rain-streaked panes. Ask their names, Hawthorne instructed, leaning forward, the desk creaking under his weight. After a hesitant pause, the boy spoke, Je m'appelle Pierre. The girl echoed softly, Sophie. Their voices, clear and melodic, carried the refinement of academies, not the rough patois of frontiers. Duval's eyebrows rose. Pierre and Sophie, he relayed. A note of awe in his tone. Where did you learn this tongue? Hawthorne pressed through Duval. The response mirrored past echoes, La Maison aux Nombreuse Chambers, the house with many rooms. Lessons from dawn's first light to dusk's embrace, other children huddled in shared purpose. But as Duval probed deeper, cracks appeared in the fog of memory. The boy's eyes lit up suddenly. Monsieur Laurent, he said, the name slipping like a key into a lock. Duval translated swiftly, excitement edging his words, a teacher, Monsieur Laurent. Tall, gaunt as a winter tree, with a proper accent. Dressed in somber suits, strict yet just, like a priest dispensing sacraments. Sophie chimed in, Madame Dubois for letters and words, Mademoiselle Claire for verses that sang of stars and sorrow. Names, tangible as bread, the first solid footing in a quagmire of mystery. Hawthorne's heart raced, these were threads to weave into a net. Describe the journey there, he urged. Vague images emerged, a stranger's wagon, canvas flapping like wings in the wind, the jolt over rutted paths under starlit skies. Trees closing in like sentinels, the house looming a sanctuary or prison? Memories sharpened only upon arrival, the creak of wooden floors, the chalky scent of blackboards, the rustle of pages turning in unison. And the end? Hawthorne asked, his voice tight. Sophie whispered, one day, Monsieur said our time was fulfilled. New homes await, he murmured, like a benediction. Then the markets, chains cold as judgment. No purpose revealed, no grand design unveiled, just education as a fleeting grace, revoked without mercy. As Caldwell departed, grumbling but placated by promises of pursuit, Hawthorne convened with Duval and Reed in the office's dimming light. The rain had eased, leaving a cleansed world outside, but inside, questions festered like wounds. A clandestine academy, Reed mused, pacing, his shadow merging with the gathering dusk. Forging minds in French finery, then discarding them back to the yoke. But to what end? Value squandered, lives fractured. Duval, crossing himself subtly, added, it reeks of vanity, gentlemen. Like the Tower of Babel, building toward heaven only to scatter in confusion. What soul profits from such? Hawthorne stared at the map, dots pulsing like heartbeats. Perhaps profit isn't the coin. What if it's a testament, a proof etched in living flesh? These children, elevated from ignorance, demonstrate the spark divine in every soul, enslaved or free. Returned to chains, they become walking indictments, intelligent, cultured, yet deemed defective by the system that binds them. Reed whistled low. Abolitionist theater? Proving the lie of inferiority? Or darker, Whitaker interjected from the doorway, having joined unannounced. An experiment in endurance. Grant them knowledge as light, then plunge them into darkness, observe if the flame endures. Monstrous, yes, but it fits, hidden yet observable, a sadist's vigil over suffering. The words evoked biblical horrors, Pharaoh's plagues, Herod's slaughter, innocence as fodder for ego. Hawthorne felt a spiritual shudder. Was this man's mimicry of God's trials, inviting celestial fury? Woe to those who call evil good, he muttered, echoing Isaiah, the room's atmosphere thickening with unspoken prayer. Their deliberation shattered with the courier's arrival, mud-splattered and urgent. From Houston, a traitor collared in a brawl. His ledgers spill secrets, mentions of the French house in Austin County. Hawthorne's eyes ignited, a locus, at last. The name French house resonated like a tolling bell, summoning visions of spectral halls where echoes of laughter mingled with lament. Austin County unfolded before them like a scroll of judgment, rolling grasslands kissed by wildflowers, interspersed with oak groves that whispered ancient secrets. Hawthorne, Reed, and two deputies rode north in the crisp autumn of 1853, armed with a judge's writ, the air crisp with falling leaves that crunched under hooves like brittle bones. The traitor, Silas Wyatt, had cracked under irons, his cell reeking of despair and stale hay. Just a ferryman, he'd confessed, eyes darting, shuttling young ones to and fro. Picked em tender, delivered to that Austin spread. Later, fetched em polished, carted to distant marts. Good coin, no queries. Backed by lawman André Beaufort, French blood, Houston roots, papers pristine as scripture. Beaufort's name opened vistas of inquiry, but the house called first. Wyatt's directions led through veiled trails, the path narrowing as trees arched overhead, forming a cathedral of branches where sunlight pierced like divine rays. On the third day, as golden hour bathed the land in ethereal glow, they crested a rise. There it stood, the French house, a two-story sentinel of cypress and stone, galleries wrapping like embracing arms, windows tall as confessions. No plume of smoke, no stir of life, yet the grounds were manicured, grass clipped as if by spectral hands, paint fresh against the elements. Abandoned, but not forsaken, Reed observed, dismounting, the saddle leather creaking. Someone tends this grave. Hawthorne nodded, a prickling at his nape, as if unseen eyes watched from the shutters. They approached cautiously, boots sinking into soft earth redolent of loam and decay. A rear door yielded to a pry bar, hinges groaning like reluctant sinners. Inside, silence enveloped them, broken only by their breaths and the distant call of a mockingbird. The interior unfolded as a temple to forbidden wisdom. The foyer, floored in polished pine that gleamed under dust motes, led to classrooms where desks aligned in regimented rows, evoking pews in a chapel of intellect. Blackboards bore faded chalk ghosts, French conjugations, poetic fragments from Hugo, equations dancing like incantations. Shelves groaned under tomes, leather-bound volumes of Voltaire's wit, Rousseau's reveries, histories of revolutions that mirrored the soul's uprising. The air carried the faint perfume of ink and aged paper, mingled with a whisper of lavender, perhaps from long-gone linens. Upstairs, dormitories stretched like monastic cells, narrow beds with quilts folded precisely, trunks harboring garments, frocks and breeches in childish sizes, fabrics fine as those for Freeman's offspring. Wardrobes held more, primers, slates etched with youthful scrawls, toys sparse but telling, a wooden top, a doll with porcelain face cracked like fractured innocence. Hawthorne's hand trembled as he lifted a book from a bedside, a child's Bible, annotated in French, verses on redemption underlined in faded ink. "Suffer the children," he whispered, the words of prayer and accusation. This was no mere school, it was a forge for souls, where innocence was hammered into something ethereal, only to be cast back into the furnace of servitude. Yet emptiness reigned, no ledgers, no rosters, no traces of the architects. Drawers yawned empty, hearths cold as forgotten altars. Reed found a hidden compartment in a desk, scraps of paper, lists of names, Pierre, Sophie, others, crossed out like sins absolved. They fled the light, Whitaker would later say, joining via letter. But judgment pursues. This house stands as witness, a monument to hubris, awaiting the thunderbolt from on high. As twilight descended, painting the rooms in hues of blood and shadow, Hawthorne stood at a window, gazing over fields once alive with childish voices. The wind rose, carrying phantom echoes, laughter, recitations, cries muffled by distance. What ghosts lingered here, imprinted on walls that had seen redemption teased and revoked? The French house, a bastion of enlightenment in a land of chains, now a hollow shell, its secrets seeping into the soil like blood atonement. But the hunt pressed on. Names like Laurent, Du Bois, Beaufort were keys to unlock deeper vaults. In this spiritual warfare, where man's experiments mocked divine order, Hawthorne sensed the scales tipping, retribution brewing in the heavens, ready to descend upon the architects of this chilling legacy. The investigation burgeoned, threads weaving into a tapestry of revelation. Beaufort, the Houston lawyer, proved elusive, a shadow in legal circles, his office a warren of files scented with cigar smoke and sealing wax. Whispers among clerks painted him as a relic of French exile, arrived pre-revolution, his accent a bridge to old worlds. Did he cloak the operation in legality's robe, forging sails to veil the vanishings? Hawthorne's letters flew like arrows, querying associates, unearthing ties to Austin land deeds shrouded in proxies, names fictitious as phantasms. Meanwhile, more children surfaced, their stories harmonizing in eerie chorus. A 10-year-old in San Antonio, reciting Baudelaire amid market chaos, twins in Brazoria, their French laced with shared secrets of the house's routines. Each interview, conducted in hushed rooms lit by candle flame, peeled layers, strict schedules, rewards of sweets for mastery, punishments of isolation for lapses. Like novices in a convent, one girl confided through an interpreter, her eyes holding monastic sorrow. But no God at the center, only words, endless words. Spiritually, the weight pressed heavier. Hawthorne knelt in his sparse quarters, Bible open to Exodus, the plagues upon Egypt for enslaving God's chosen. Were these children modern Israelites, marked by a pharaoh of education? Or vessels for a greater reckoning, their knowledge a firebrand to ignite abolition's blaze? Reed, ever pragmatic, scoured trader networks, unmasking intermediaries paid in gold that gleamed like Judas silver. Follow the coin, he urged, and find the betrayers. As winter's chill gripped Texas, frosting fields in crystalline judgment, a breakthrough loomed. A disgruntled overseer from a neighboring farm, his breath fogged with bourbon in a dimly lit tavern, spilled tales, nocturnal wagons to the French house, cries muffled under tarps, figures in cloaks directing the flow. Educated darkies, he slurred, for some madman's fancy. Beaufort's the puppet master, but whispers say a higher hand, perhaps a exile noble, dreaming of empires lost. Hawthorne rode through frost-laced dawns, the air biting his conscience's sting, converging on Beaufort's lair. The confrontation unfolded in a study lined with maps of ancien regimes, the lawyer's face pale as parchment under lamplight. Legal matters, Beaufort demurred, his French-tinged English smooth as silk. But under pressure, cracks formed, admissions of facilitating special placements, funds from anonymous patrons. An experiment in humanity, he confessed finally, eyes evasive. To prove the enslaved mind's capacity, challenge the chain's lie. But not mine, the vision belongs to Laurent, a philosopher adrift. Laurent, the name from childish lips, now flesh. A middle-aged savant, refugee from France's tumults, ensconced in Texas wilds to test theories of nurture over nature. He believed education could redeem, Beaufort murmured, even in bondage's shadow. Select young souls, immerse them in culture's waters, release them, observe if enlightenment endures amid degradation. Monstrous alchemy, souls transmuted, then assayed in slavery's crucible. Hawthorne recoiled, visions of alchemists burned at stakes flashing, hubris inviting hellfire. And the children, he demanded. Pawns in your game? Beaufort's gaze faltered. Sacrifices for truth. But divine, perhaps revealing slavery's sin through living proof. As arrests loomed, the spiritual undercurrent surged. In dreams, Hawthorne saw the house ablaze, flames purging like Sodom's fall. These children, with their haunted French, embodied redemption's cry, innocence stolen, yet resilient, a testament to the soul's indomitable spark. In Texas' vast theater, where sin and salvation warred, the French house stood as altar in warning, tamper with God's creations, and reap the whirlwind of justice. Dust swirled in the slanted beams of afternoon sunlight piercing the shuttered windows of the French house's administrative office, carrying the faint, musty scent of aged ink and forgotten ambitions. The room was a sanctum of secrets, its oak desk scarred by years of quill scratches, flanked by iron file cabinets that loomed like silent confessors. Sheriff Elias Hawthorne's fingers, rough from years of gripping reins and rifles, trembled slightly as he pulled open a drawer, revealing stacks of ledgers bound in cracked leather, their pages yellowed like old parchment from a forbidden scripture. Deputy Silas Reed and the French merchant Émile Duval flanked him, their breaths shallow in the oppressive quiet, broken only by the distant creak of floorboards under the other deputies' boots as they scoured the property. The air tasted of abandonment, stale, with undertones of chalk dust and lavender soap, remnants of lives once molded here. Hawthorne flipped open the first ledger, the spine cracking like a bone under strain. Rows of meticulous entries marched across the pages, names like whispers from the grave: Elias, aged 4 upon arrival, departure at 8, progress in verb conjugation, excellent, aptitude for poetry, promising. Dates stretched back to 1844, a decade of shadows. "Lord have mercy," Hawthorne muttered, his voice a low rumble echoing off the paneled walls. "They've been harvesting souls since before the Alamo's dust settled. Dozens, maybe scores, cycled through these walls. 3 to 5 years each, forged in French fire, then cast out like tested alloys." Reed peered over his shoulder, his face paling in the golden light. "Clinical as a surgeon's notes. Behavior, compliant. Disposition, reflective. But no why, no confession of purpose. It's like reading a devil's ledger, tallying sins without naming them." As the deputies combed the outbuildings, barns empty but for hay-scented echoes, gardens overgrown with weeds choking rosebushes that once bloomed in orderly rows, Crawford, one of the reinforcements, unearthed a bundle from a locked drawer, tied with faded twine. Letters, sealed with wax impressions bearing a subtle fleur-de-lis. Duval, his hands steady despite the spiritual weight pressing on them all, translated aloud, his voice a melodic bridge between worlds. The correspondence flowed between André Beaufort, the elusive Houston lawyer, and undoubtedly Laurent, the spectral teacher whose name had haunted childish recollections. Beaufort's missives, penned on fine vellum that crinkled like autumn leaves, spoke of the project with the fervor of a missionary, securing funds from Parisian patrons, idealists who preached the gospel of human equality, unbound by chains of birth or bondage. "We must veil our work in secrecy," one letter urged, "yet allow the fruits to ripen in plain sight, seeds of doubt sown in the fertile soil of southern minds." Lawrence replies, scripted in elegant cursive that evoked candlelit salons, brimmed with philosophical pride. He chronicled triumphs, a child's mastery of Molière's wit, another's recitation of Rousseau's reveries under starlit Texas skies. Can the spark of enlightenment, once ignited, be quenched by the yoke? He pondered in one passage, his words a challenge to divine order, or a blasphemy against it. One letter seized Hawthorne's soul like a vice. Lawrence's hand confessed, "We acknowledge the ephemerality of our gift. Liberation eludes us, we cannot shatter their irons eternally. Yet in proving their parity with Europe's progeny worthy of wisdom's mantle, we unmask the deceptions that sanctify their subjugation. When their voices rise, fluent and profound, may it herald a reckoning, a thunderclap against the edifice of iniquity." Duval's translation faltered, his eyes misting. "Mon Dieu," he whispered, crossing himself against the chill that seeped from the words. Not salvation for the individual, but a sermon etched in flesh. Political theater, with innocents as actors doomed to exit the stage in chains. Rage coiled in Hawthorne's chest, cold as a winter norther sweeping the plains. These abolitionists, cloaked in nobility's robes, had wielded children as weapons, educated them in the light of knowledge, only to hurl them back into darkness, hoping their anomalous existence would erode slavery's foundations like acid on stone. "Pawns," he growled, slamming a fist on the desk, dust motes exploding like startled spirits. "Sacrificed on altars of ideology. Shown paradise's glimpse, poetry that stirs the soul, philosophy that questions the stars, then condemned to fields where such treasures rust unused." Reed nodded grimly, his shadow merging with the room's gathering dusk. "Noble ends masking infernal means. Experiments on breathing clay, mocking God's creation. What retribution awaits those who play creator?" The documents painted a mosaic of meticulous sin. Funded by French visionaries disillusioned with Europe's revolutions, they had enlisted Laurent, a Parisian pedagogue exiled to Louisiana's bayous in the 1840s, to helm this clandestine seminary. Beaufort orchestrated the symphony, procuring toddlers through veiled brokers, their tender ages ripe for imprinting, like wax seals awaiting the stamp. Properties held in labyrinthine trusts, papers pristine as baptismal fonts, ensuring legality's shield. Children selected arbitrarily from plantations dotting the Brazos and Colorado valleys, vanished into wagons under moonless nights, emerged years later at distant marts, their minds brimming with contraband culture. In their hubris, these architects viewed themselves as prophets, seeding cognitive discord, a slave child quoting Voltaire amid cotton rows, a domestic reciting Racine over hearthfires, living contradictions to the dogma of inherent inferiority. A slow poison, Beaufort wrote, eroding the pillars of this peculiar institution from within. Yet to Hawthorne, kneeling later in the empty dormitory, fingering a forgotten slate etched with childish French script, it reeked of cruelty veiled as grace. These young souls, granted manna from heaven's table, literature's feast, science's wonders, only to starve in bondage's wasteland. Knowledge is a curse, illuminating the depth of their despair, like Lucifer's fall from glory. The final ledger entry, dated 6 months prior, chronicled the dissolution, remaining pupils dispatched to auctions in Galveston, Austin, San Antonio, scattered like chaff in the wind. Why abandon the vineyard? Duval queried, his voice echoing in the hollow halls. Beaufort's last epistle revealed the fracture. The gaze of authority tightens. Your inquiries, sheriff, pierce our veil. Cease, lest exposure ignite backlash. Trust the sown seeds to bloom in time. Pragmatism compounded the retreat. Parisian patrons, their coffers and convictions waning, recoiled at the absence of apocalypse. No uprising sparked, no consciences convulsed. The French-speaking anomalies stirred whispers, not revolutions, curiosity, not cataclysm. Where have the phantoms fled? Reed demanded, as twilight painted the windows in bruised purples, the house's silence deepening like a grave. Laurent, the epistles hinted, sailed back to France's shores, perhaps to salons where theories thrived untethered to human cost. Beaufort shuttered his Houston chambers, vanishing into the ether, west to California goldfields, or north to abolitionist strongholds? The network dissolved like mist at dawn, intermediaries silenced by gold or fear, sponsors severing ties with the finality of guillotines. They flee like Cain, Hawthorne spat, bitterness etching his features as he gathered evidence under lantern light, flames flickering like judgmental eyes. Ledgers copied, letters bundled, the harvest of truth, yet poisoned fruit. The day waned, the group documenting amid the spectral quiet, wagons loaded with artifacts that screamed of moral quagmire. But justice? Elusive as redemption in this fallen land. Prosecution faltered on slavery's ramparts, acquisitions legal, holdings sanctioned, disposals documented. To indict was to argue education as assault, affirming the very heresy the plotters sought to dismantle, that knowledge corrupted property, diminished value. Irony twisted like thorns, seeking equity for victims demanded endorsing their dehumanization. By early 1854, Hawthorne's report, thick as a Bible, bound in resolve, landed on state desks in Austin, where bureaucrats in starched collars perused under gaslight. Testimonies from children, their words translated like prophetic scrolls, inventories of the house's scholastic relics, philosophical confessions extracted from ink. Response? A murmur of indifference, laced with relief's sigh. No statutes shattered, an official decreed in a letter scented with sealing wax. The apparatus dismantled itself, principles dispersed. Pursuit? Profligate, provocative, stirring abolitionist hornets, enraging planters. Let shadows claim it. The French house sold anonymously, its new stewards oblivious to the ghosts imprinted on its beams, echoes of recitations, laughter stifled by departure's dread. Children lingered in limbo, their fates a litany of loss. Hawthorne tracked them through correspondence, writers carrying missives across prairies blooming with bluebonnets, under skies vast as God's canvas. Pierre, the boy whose tongue first named Laurent, toiled in Waller County's fields, red earth caking his hands, sun beating like divine wrath. English commands now obeyed haltingly, his once elegant French reduced to mutters under breath, a private liturgy forgotten. His master deemed him dull stock, a bargain turned burden, spirit withered like unpicked cotton. Sophie fared the domestic's lot in San Antonio, kitchens redolent of chili and cornmeal, her braids tied back as she scrubbed under a mistress versed in pidgin French. Patience preserved fragments of her polish, but poetry yielded to practicality. Verses of Victor Hugo supplanted by recipes recited rote. Sold thrice, each transfer a crucifixion of hope, her refinement eroded like sandstone under rain. Others mirrored the descent, a girl in Galveston whispering faded fables to herself at night, under quilts threadbare as her memories, a boy in Austin suppressing sonnets to avoid the lash's query. Fluency faded, a slow exorcism, French retreating like a tide, leaving English's stark shores. Within years, the language of their enlightenment dimmed to dreams, suppressed lest it invite suspicion or scorn. Hawthorne pondered in solitary vigils, Bible open to Ecclesiastes, for in much wisdom is much grief, and he that increaseth knowledge increaseth sorrow. Better ignorance is bliss, or the torment of tasted fruit? The children, in rare confessions through interpreters, divided. Some evoked the house with wistful reverence, a unique interlude where they were scholars, not chattel, treated with dignity's touch, minds watered like sacred gardens. Others seethed, viewing it as serpent's deceit, knowledge dangled, then withdrawn, sharpening bondage's blade. Judge Whittaker, his letters a balm of shared burden, encapsulated the spiritual rift. They sought to affirm divinity in every soul, but birthed a new torment, awareness without agency, light in eternal night. Knowledge sans liberty, a heresy against heaven's design. The dossier moldered in archives, dust veiling its truths like a shroud. Officially interred, yet Hawthorne's conscience rebelled. In 1854's sweltering summer, as heat waves shimmered like mirages over the Gulf, he dispatched epistles northward to Boston's firebrands, Philadelphia's Quakers, detailing the saga. Witness this paradox, he urged, proof of capacity, indictment of cruelty. Use it to fuel your righteous fires. Replies varied as temperaments, enthusiasm from some, envisioning the tale as abolition's clarioned children as martyrs, their French tongues angelic indictments. Others recoiled at the ethics, uneasy with education weaponized, ideals tainted by exploitation. Skeptics dismissed it as frontier fable, incredulous that such a symphony of subversion hummed undetected. Ultimately, the French-speaking enigmas dissolved into obscurity, their legacy a whisper in windswept lore, not the cataclysmic wave their architects envisioned, but ripples in a sea of sin. Yet in Hawthorne's twilight reflections, as he sat on his porch under star-pricked skies, pipe smoke curling like incense, the spiritual undercurrents endured. These children, vessels of a flawed redemption, embodied humanity's hubris, mortals meddling in divine domains, granting forbidden fruit without uprooting the tree of knowledge's curse. Divine retribution, subtle yet sure, manifested in the operation's collapse. Patrons' faith faltered, leaders scattered, fruits withered unpicked. Justice, perhaps, in the quiet erosion, slavery's edifice unchallenged overtly, but seeds of doubt sown in souls like his own. For in exposing this, Hawthorne glimpsed a higher truth. True emancipation demanded not experiments, but exodus, a parting of seas, a toppling of pharaohs, guided by heaven's unerring hand. The mystery's close brought no catharsis, only deeper communion with the eternal questions. Guilt shadowed the perpetrators, wherever they fled, Beaufort in exile's anonymity, Laurent in Paris salons, haunted by echoes of childish voices. For the children, redemption flickered in fragments, a retained verse murmured in secret, a spark of self-worth enduring lashes. Sin's legacy, justice's slow grind, Texas' vast canvas painted with blood and longing, awaiting the final brushstroke of freedom's dawn. In this, Hawthorne found solace, the wheel turned, divine retribution inexorable, reclaiming stolen innocence in ways mortal minds could scarcely fathom. The years rolled onward like the slow turn of wagon wheels over parched prairie, each passing season grinding the sharp edges of memory into dust. By 1856, Sheriff Elias Hawthorne found his days consumed by fresher wounds, cattle rustlers carving paths through the Llano Estacado, border skirmishes flaring like dry tinder, the relentless press of a state swelling with ambition and immigrants. Galveston's docks teemed with new faces, Houston's streets pulsed with the clamor of progress, yet in the quiet hours, when lamplight pooled on his desk like spilled moonlight, Hawthorne's thoughts returned to the children. Their voices, once so clear and crystalline in French, now echoed only in his mind, faint as hymns sung in a distant chapel. He never spoke of them publicly, the case had been sealed, buried beneath layers of official indifference and the unspoken pact to let sleeping sins lie. But the weight remained, a spiritual bruise that no new investigation could erase. In the spring of 1857, word arrived on a steamer from New Orleans, carried in the hushed tones of a mutual acquaintance. André Beaufort, the architect of legal veils, had succumbed to fever in the low, damp quarters of the French Quarter. Among his effects, trunks of yellowed documents, ledgers of transactions long closed, a single manuscript surfaced, wrapped in oilcloth as if to shield it from judgment. The pages, penned in Beaufort's precise hand, formed a fervent apologia in defense of the French House project. No publisher ever touched it. His kin, mortified by the taint of abolitionist zeal, consigned most of his writings to the fire. Only fragments endured, salvaged by a discreet colleague who sensed their value as relics of a quixotic crusade. Hawthorne obtained a copy through back channels, reading it alone in the courthouse after midnight. The Gulf breeze rattling the shutters like impatient spirits. Beaufort's words burned with unrepentant conviction. We could not shatter their chains, the law, custom, the very architecture of Southern life forbade it. Yet we could arm their minds. We could demonstrate, through irrefutable proof, that the enslaved child possesses the same divine spark as any heir to European academies. Knowledge, once kindled, cannot be wholly extinguished. Even in bondage, the mind may remain sovereign. History, we trusted, would vindicate us not as liberators of bodies, but as redeemers of souls. The pamphlet ended on a note of weary prophecy: visionaries or fools? Let posterity decide. We sowed in darkness, believing dawn would come. The words stirred no comfort in Hawthorne. He saw only the arrogance of men who played at Providence, granting glimpses of Eden while ensuring return to exile. Beaufort's death closed one chapter. Laurent's fate remained shrouded. Ship manifests confirmed his passage to Le Havre in late 1853, but thereafter the trail dissolved into the fog of old Europe. Did he resume teaching in some provincial lycée, regaling students with tales of American frontiers? Did guilt ever summon the faces of those he had shaped and abandoned? Or did he carry on in silence, the experiment filed away like a failed treatise? No letters, no memoirs surfaced to answer. Laurent vanished as completely as the children he had once summoned from obscurity. Time worked its inexorable alchemy on the children themselves. They grew into men and women marked by labor's stoop and survival scars. The French that had once flowed like river water through their speech receded gradually, eroded by necessity, by the lash of overseers who demanded plain English, by the sheer exhaustion of days that allowed no room for poetry. Some retained shards, a proverb murmured under breath during cotton picking, a verb conjugated absent-mindedly while mending harnesses. Others surrendered it entirely, the language retreating like a tide that never returned, leaving only the hollow echo of what had been. A handful escaped bondage's grasp before the war's thunder. One boy, purchased by a Quaker-leaning planter near Austin, was quietly manumitted in 1858 and sent north via whispered networks. Another girl, sold to a household in Galveston where the mistress spoke halting Creole, earned manumission through years of devoted service. When the Civil War erupted and emancipation swept across the South in 1865, still more found freedom, some through Union lines, others through the slow unraveling of Confederate defeat. Whether the early education had steeled their resolve, planted seeds of self-worth that blossomed in liberty, or merely sharpened the pain of lost years, no record could say. The connections were too intimate, too woven into the fabric of individual souls, to be charted on paper. Hawthorne retired in 1859, as secession fever gripped Texas and the nation hurtled toward fracture. In his final weeks as sheriff, he composed a private memoir sealed with wax and entrusted to his son with strict instructions: open only after my passing. The document, unearthed decades later amid family papers yellowed by time, stands as the fullest testament to the affair. In its pages, Hawthorne confronts the abyss once more. I have upheld the law, trusting it to embody justice. This case shattered that faith. What was done was lawful: purchases notarized, transfers recorded, education no crime under statute. Yet it was profoundly unjust. A gift laced with poison, compassion twisted to serve ideology over innocence. I cannot damn the hatred of slavery, it is righteous fire. But I must condemn the means. Children were not souls to be cherished, they became instruments, living syllogisms in a philosophical war. Given wings they could never spread, taught to soar while tethered. They became paradoxes incarnate, proof of boundless potential, and living rebuke to its denial. He closed with a prayerful lament: I hope some flame endures within them. I fear most carry only ashes. If these words are ever read, let them warn: noble intent, divorced from wisdom and consequence, births its own cruelties. The war against evil must weigh not only the cause, but the cost borne by the vulnerable. The French-speaking children never ignited the conflagration their architects envisioned. The anomaly remained a whisper in Texas lore, surfacing in private letters, in the margins of planters' diaries, in the occasional scholarly footnote. Historians encountering fragments dismissed them as folklore or misremembered encounters with Louisiana Creoles. Abolitionist circles, when the tale reached them post-war, embraced it cautiously, a brave if blemished effort, constrained by era's chains. Yet the ethical wound festered, using innocence as evidence, however noble the proof. In the Reconstruction decades, a few emancipated voices spoke haltingly of their strange childhood interlude. WPA interviewers in the 1930s captured fragments, an elderly man in Houston recalling, "They learned us French before English. Treated us like schoolchildren, books, chalk, kindness. For a spell, I believed I might be more than a field hand. Then they sent us back, and it all turned to dust." Kindness? Cruelty? Both, maybe. It hurt worse knowing what I could have been. A woman in Philadelphia, her memory sharp despite age, offered contrast. "They showed me I could learn. That stayed. When freedom came, I already knew my mind wasn't broken. I taught myself English proper, built a life." Would I have tried without those years? Perhaps. But knowing I'd done it once gave me courage. Impact varied like rainfall across parched land, some souls watered and strengthened, others scorched by the memory of withheld promise. The French house building itself endured, hands changing, purpose shifting. By 1900 it was an ordinary farmhouse, its galleries screened against mosquitoes, schoolrooms repurposed as parlors, library shelves emptied for family Bibles and almanacs. No plaque, no marker. The past slept unmarked beneath new paint and fresh plowed fields. In 1898, a diligent historian tracing slavery's threads in Texas archives stumbled upon references to the French anomaly. Contacting Hawthorne's heirs, he received the sealed memoir. Months of verification followed, cross-referencing ledgers, locating aged survivors, piecing together the mosaic. The 1899 article in a scholarly journal laid bare the operation for the first time publicly. Response proved tepid. Slavery's abolition was old news, Reconstruction's betrayals fresh wounds. The tale registered as quaint tragedy, a parable of good intentions warped by evil systems, a caution against treating humans as symbols rather than bearers of sacred dignity. Across the decades, in scattered homes from the piney woods to the Rio Grande plains, aging men and women carried the remnants. A grandfather in a Galveston tenement might murmur a line of Racine to a puzzled grandchild. A grandmother on a Brazos farm could still parse a verb tense while rocking on the porch, her eyes distant. Most let it fade, the French dissolving like mist at sunrise, unreinforced, unneeded, a dream too fragile for daylight. The French house project, in the end, achieved neither triumph nor catastrophe. It proved capacity without altering condition, illuminated equality without dismantling inequality. The children had spoken perfect French, raised identically, taken young, schooled rigorously, returned to chains. The pattern had been uncovered, documented, contemplated. Then, like so much of history's quiet agonies, it was archived. Fading into obscurity, sustained only by brittle paper, whispered recollections, and the occasional uneasy conscience. Hawthorne's closing reflection endures as epitaph: "I pursued a mystery to its heart and found only our common frailty. Truth unveiled changed nothing, offered no redress, healed no wound, eased no burden." Sometimes revelation serves only to expose our impotence before the structures that birth such sorrow. The children spoke French. I learned why. And the knowing altered nothing at all. In the vast silence that followed, new generations grew beneath Texas suns, never knowing that once, in shadowed rooms not far from their fields and towns, others like them had tasted a different life, if only for a season, before the world insisted they forget. The French house stood, invisible monument to insufficient grace, to the peril of loving ideas more than people, and to the stubborn resilience of souls that endure beyond both intention and betrayal. The case was closed. The mystery solved. And the echoes, though faint, linger still, waiting for a reckoning that history, in its mercy or its cruelty, has yet to deliver.